Sometimes, the coldest nights bring the warmest hearts together. When you have nothing left but kindness to give, that's when you discover what truly matters in life. On a bitter Wyoming winter night, widow Ruth Calder opens her cabin door to a desperate cowboy and his silent daughter. With barely enough food for herself and dwindling firewood, Ruth offers shelter anyway. The stranger, Jacob Lanning, speaks little about where they've come from. He only says they're traveling home, but Jacob is hiding something, a fortune, a past, and a reason he's been running. As the blizzard traps them together, three broken souls begin to heal around a crackling fire. What happens when the snow melts and the truth comes out? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ruth Calder had learned to measure her life in small increments. A cord of firewood meant warmth for 3 weeks if she was careful. A jar of preserves stretched across 5 meals if she added enough water to the broth. The propane tank would last through February if she kept the heat low and wore 2 sweaters instead of 1. At 66, she'd become an expert in the arithmetic of scarcity. The cabin stood in the foothills of the Wyoming Rockies, 20 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a narrow road that turned treacherous in winter. Tom had built it with his own hands 43 years ago, the summer after their wedding. Ruth could still see him then, young and strong, his hands rough with honest work, his eyes bright with dreams of the life they'd build together. The wedding photograph sat on the mantel above the stone fireplace. The black and white image faded to sepia now. Ruth in her simple white dress, Tom in his best suit borrowed from his brother. They were both smiling, really smiling. The kind of joy that comes before life teaches you about loss and compromise and the slow wearing down of hope. Tom had been gone 3 years. Heart attack while splitting wood one October morning. Ruth found him an hour later, lying peaceful in the sawdust, the axe still in his hand. The doctor said he went quick, didn't suffer. Ruth supposed that was meant to be a comfort. She kept the cabin exactly as he'd left it. His coat still hung by the door. His boots sat on the mat, waiting for feet that would never fill them. The carving tools he'd used to make little animals for the town children, rabbits and bears and deer, remained in the shed, gathering dust among the cobwebs. Ruth knew people in town talked about her. The widow who'd gone strange with grief, who barely came to church anymore, who turned down every invitation to Sunday dinner or quilting circle or Bible study. They meant well, those offers. But Ruth couldn't bear the pity in their eyes, the careful way they spoke to her, as if she might shatter like old glass. Better to be alone, safer. She'd sold off most of the land after Tom died, keeping only the 5 acres around the cabin. The money was gone now, spent on taxes and repairs and simple survival. Her only income came from a tiny pension Tom had earned working winters at the ski resort in Jackson. And it barely covered the essentials. This particular February evening, Ruth stood at her kitchen window watching the snow fall. It had been coming down since noon, thick and heavy, the kind of storm that meant business. Already 6 inches had accumulated, drifts building against the cabin walls. The wind howled through the pines, and the temperature was dropping fast. Ruth checked her supplies with the automatic calculation of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. 4 jars of canned vegetables, 3 of preserves, half a sack of flour, some dried beans, a few potatoes, enough for maybe 2 weeks if she was careful. After that, she'd have to wait for the road to clear and make the long drive to town. She turned from the window, intending to build up the fire for the night, when something made her look back. 2 figures were moving up the road through the snow. No, not moving, struggling. A tall figure and a smaller one beside it, both bent against the wind. Ruth's heart clutched. No one should be out in this weather. The nearest house was 10 miles down the mountain, and the town was another 10 beyond that. She grabbed Tom's heavy coat from the peg and pulled it on, then opened the door. The cold hit her like a fist. She stood on the porch, squinting through the driving snow. "Hello," she called out, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Hello there." The figures changed direction, angling toward her cabin. As they drew closer, Ruth could make out more details. A man, tall and lean, wearing a canvas coat and a cowboy hat heavy with snow. Beside him, a girl, teenager maybe, wrapped in a jacket too thin for this weather. They reached the porch steps, and Ruth got her first clear look at them. The man's face was weathered and windburned, maybe 50, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent outdoors. His jaw was dark with a few days' beard. The girl was perhaps 15, with long dark hair plastered to her face, her eyes red-rimmed from cold, or tears, or both. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice rough, "I'm sorry to bother you, but our truck went off the road about a mile back. We've been walking trying to find help. Is there any chance—" He stopped, as if the words cost him something. "Would you have a phone we could use?" "Call for a tow." Ruth looked at them both, saw the exhaustion, the cold, the quiet desperation. The girl was shivering badly. "Phone lines are down," Ruth said, making her decision. "They always go down in storms like this." "Come inside before you freeze." "We don't want to impose," the man started, but Ruth was already holding the door open. "It's not an imposition. It's common sense. Get in here." They climbed the steps, and Ruth ushered them inside. Snow fell from their clothes onto her clean floor, but she didn't care. She'd seen hypothermia before. They needed warmth more than she needed a tidy house. "Sit by the fire," she instructed, pointing to the 2 chairs flanking the hearth. "I'll get blankets." She moved to the bedroom, pulled the quilts from her bed, all 3 of them, and brought them back. The man and girl had shed their wet coats and were huddled close to the flames. Ruth wrapped a quilt around each of them. "I'm Ruth Calder," she said. "This is my home, Jacob Lanning," the man replied. "This is my daughter, Lily." Ruth looked at the girl, who hadn't spoken. Lily's eyes met hers briefly, then dropped to the floor. Something in that look made Ruth's chest ache. She'd seen that kind of grief before in her own mirror. "Pleased to meet you both," Ruth said, keeping her voice gentle. "Let me make some coffee. And I've got soup. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. You don't have to—" Jacob began. "I know I don't have to," Ruth interrupted, not unkindly. "But I'm going to anyway. Now sit still and get warm." She moved to the kitchen, put the kettle on the stove, and started warming up the vegetable soup she'd made that morning. It was thin, mostly broth and a few carrots and potatoes, but it would do. She found the last of her bread, hard now but good enough for dipping. While the soup heated, she studied them from the corner of her eye. Jacob sat with his shoulders hunched, staring into the fire. His hands were rough and calloused, working hands. The clothes he wore were worn, but had been good quality once. The kind of durable gear a man who knew the land would choose. Lily sat perfectly still, the quilt pulled tight around her. She hadn't looked at her father once since sitting down. There was a distance between them, invisible but tangible. Ruth recognized it. The space grief creates between people who should be close. Ruth brought mugs of coffee first, black with a spoonful of sugar in each, to help with the cold. Jacob accepted his with a nod of thanks. Lily took hers, but just held it, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "The soup will be ready in a few minutes," Ruth said, settling into Tom's old rocker. "Where were you headed?" "North," Jacob said after a moment. "Toward Jackson Hole. Long way to go in this weather. We didn't expect the storm to come in so fast." Ruth nodded. She'd lived here long enough to know how quickly Wyoming weather could turn. "The road will be impassable tonight. Maybe tomorrow too, depending on how much we get." Jacob's jaw tightened. "We'll manage. Soon as it's light, we'll head back to the truck, see if we can dig it out." "You'll do no such thing," Ruth said firmly. "Not until the county plow comes through. You'd freeze before you made it halfway. We can't stay here. We've already imposed enough. You haven't imposed at all. And I'm not sending a child out in a blizzard. That's final." Jacob looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ruth's expression stopped him. He nodded slowly. "Just for tonight, then. We'll be out of your way in the morning." "We'll see what morning brings," Ruth said, rising to check the soup. She ladled it into bowls, brought them to her guests with the hard bread. They ate in silence, Jacob carefully, Lily mechanically. Ruth noticed the girl barely managed half her bowl before setting it aside. "Not hungry?" Ruth asked gently. Lily shook her head, eyes down. "It's been a long day," Jacob said quietly. "We're both tired." Ruth understood what he wasn't saying. This was about more than physical exhaustion. She'd seen enough of life to recognize trauma, when it sat in her living room. "You can have the bedroom," Ruth said. "Clean sheets on the bed. It's small, but there's room for both of you." "We can't take your bed," Jacob protested. "Yes, you can. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I've done it plenty of times, Mrs. Calder." "It's Miss, actually." "Well, widow, and I've made up my mind, so arguing is wasted breath." She softened her tone. "Please, let me do this." Jacob studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." "We're grateful." Ruth showed them to the bedroom, gave them extra blankets, and pointed out the bathroom. "There's not much hot water, but enough for washing up. Make yourselves comfortable." She closed the door to give them privacy and returned to the living room. The fire was burning low. She added 2 logs, more than she'd normally use, but her guests needed the warmth and settled into Tom's rocker. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Snow hissed against the glass. Ruth pulled one of the quilts around herself and stared into the flames. She thought about the 2 strangers in her bedroom. Jacob with his careful courtesy and his worn hands. Lily with her silence and her sorrowful eyes. They were running from something, or toward something, or maybe both at once. Ruth knew about running. After Tom died, she'd run too, in her own way. Run from the town, from concern, from connection. Run into this cabin and these mountains, where she could be alone with her grief. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. Ruth wasn't sure if that was good or bad. But sitting in the firelight, listening to the storm rage outside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Not comfort, purpose, maybe. The sense that she was needed. It was a small feeling, fragile as a bird's egg. But it was there. Ruth closed her eyes and listened to the quiet sounds from the bedroom, the creak of the bed, the murmur of Jacob's voice saying something to his daughter, the silence that followed. Outside, the blizzard buried the world in white. Inside, 3 people who'd been traveling their own separate wildernesses had found temporary shelter under one roof. Ruth thought of Tom's words, spoken years ago during another storm. "We're all just passing through." "Ruth, the best we can do is be kind to each other along the way." She'd been kind tonight. That was something. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this was enough. The fire crackled and popped. The wind screamed, and Ruth sat in her rocking chair, keeping watch through the long winter night, while strangers slept in her bed and the snow fell endlessly outside. Ruth woke to pale grey light filtering through the windows. The storm had eased to a steady snowfall, but the drifts outside reached halfway up the porch railings. She stood, joints protesting the night spent in the chair, and moved to stoke the fire. The bedroom door opened. Jacob emerged, fully dressed, looking like he'd barely slept. His eyes were shadowed, his movements careful, as if trying not to disturb something fragile. "Morning," Ruth said quietly. "Coffee?" "I'd be grateful." They moved to the kitchen, keeping their voices low. Through the window, the world was a uniform white. No distinction between ground and sky, no sign of the road. "Still coming down," Jacob observed. "It'll be another day at least before the plows come through. Maybe 2. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. Calder." "Ruth, please." She poured coffee into 2 mugs, added sugar to both. "And it's not hospitality. It's just what you do when people need help." They sat at the small kitchen table. Outside, a pine branch cracked under the weight of snow, the sound sharp in the quiet morning. "How's Lily?" Ruth asked, "Still sleeping?" "She didn't sleep much on the road." "Maybe she feels safe here." The word hung between them, safe. Ruth studied Jacob's face, saw the exhaustion, the worry, the something else underneath that looked like guilt. "She hasn't spoken," Ruth said carefully. "Not a word since you arrived." Jacob stared into his coffee. For a long moment, Ruth thought he wouldn't answer. Then he took a breath, and the words came slowly, like they cost him something. "She stopped talking 4 months ago. At her mother's funeral." Ruth's chest tightened. She waited, letting the silence give him space. "Sarah, my wife, she died in a car accident, September 15th. She was driving home from her sister's place. Truck ran a red light, hit her driver's side. She died at the hospital 3 hours later." Jacob's voice was flat, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. Lily was at school. I had to pick her up, tell her. She screamed. She cried. Then at the funeral she just stopped. Hasn't said a word since. Oh, Jacob. Ruth reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. His fingers were cold despite the coffee. I'm so sorry. I took her to doctors, therapists. They said it's selective mutism, trauma-induced. They said to give her time, keep her in familiar surroundings, maintain routine. He laughed bitterly. So naturally, I did the opposite. Pulled her out of school, left our apartment, started driving. Smart, right? You were grieving too, Ruth said gently. We don't always make sense when we're hurting. I just couldn't stay there. Everything reminded me of Sarah, the apartment, the town, her things. And Lily, she'd just sit and stare at the walls. I thought if I got her away, took her somewhere new, maybe she'd... He stopped, shook his head. I don't know what I thought. Where are you going? Really? My father's ranch, near Jackson Hole. I inherited it when he died 2 years ago. Haven't been back since I was 18. Figured it was time. Before Ruth could respond, they heard movement from the bedroom. Lily appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of the quilts. Her hair was tangled, her face puffy from sleep. She looked at her father, then at Ruth, expression unreadable. Morning, sweetheart, Jacob said, his voice transforming, becoming softer. Did you sleep all right? Lily nodded. Come have some breakfast. Ruth's been kind enough to... Lily moved into the kitchen, and something fell from the quilt, a small object that hit the floor with a metallic clink. It skittered across the worn linoleum and came to rest near Ruth's chair, a locket. Silver, delicate on a thin chain, Ruth bent to pick it up. As she did, the locket fell open in her palm. Inside was a photograph. A woman, maybe 40, with kind eyes and dark hair like Lily's. She was smiling at whoever held the camera, her expression full of warmth and life. Ruth's breath caught. She looked up at Lily, who had frozen in place, staring at the locket in Ruth's hand. The girl's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Ruth said quickly, holding it out. I didn't mean to, but Lily wasn't looking at Ruth anymore. She was looking at her father, and her face was crumpling. The tears spilled over, running silently down her cheeks. Jacob moved fast, crossing to his daughter, pulling her into his arms. Lily buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held her tight, one hand on her head, his own tears falling into her hair. I know, baby, he whispered. I know, I miss her too. God, I miss her so much. Ruth stood there, the locket still in her palm, feeling like an intruder on their grief. But she couldn't look away from this moment, this father and daughter clinging to each other, drowning together in their loss. After a long moment, Jacob looked at Ruth over Lily's head. His face was raw, stripped of all pretense. That's Sarah, he said. Lily wears it always. Her mother gave it to her on her 14th birthday, 6 months before. He couldn't finish. Ruth moved closer, gently placed the locket in Lily's hand. The girl pulled back from her father just enough to look down at it, her fingers closing around the silver oval. She was beautiful, Ruth said softly. You look just like her. Lily's eyes met Ruth's, and in them Ruth saw an ocean of pain. The kind of pain she knew intimately, the kind that comes from losing the person who made the world make sense. I lost my husband 3 years ago, Ruth heard herself say. Different circumstances, but the same... She paused, searching for the right word. The same emptiness after. The same feeling like part of you is just gone and will never come back. Jacob was watching her now too. Ruth continued, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning in your own life. To look around and see everything that reminds you of them until you can't breathe. To want to run away from the pain, except you can't because it goes with you wherever you go. She looked at Jacob. I've been running too, just in place, hiding in this cabin away from everyone. Thought it would hurt less if I was alone. She shook her head. It doesn't. It just hurts quieter. The three of them stood in the small kitchen, connected by invisible threads of shared grief. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world. Stay, Ruth said suddenly. Not just today, until the storm clears completely. However long that takes. Ruth, we can't. Yes, you can. You should. She looked at Lily, then back at Jacob. Maybe we're all meant to stop running for a little while. Catch our breath. Figure out what comes next. You don't know us, Jacob said, but there was no force behind it. I know grief. That's enough for now. Jacob looked down at his daughter. Lily, what do you think? Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked around the cabin, at the fire crackling in the hearth, at the wedding photo on the mantel, at Ruth standing there with her worn clothes and kind eyes. Then she nodded, just once but firm. All right, Jacob said quietly. If you're sure, I'm sure. Ruth felt something loosening in her chest. I'll make breakfast. Real breakfast this time, not just thin soup. We'll figure out the rest as we go. She moved to the stove, pulled out the last of her eggs, the butter she'd been saving. Behind her, she heard Jacob murmur something to Lily, heard the girl's footsteps as she returned to the bedroom. Jacob came to stand beside Ruth at the counter. Why are you doing this? Ruth cracked an egg into the pan, watched it sizzle. Tom, my husband, he used to say that kindness is never wasted, even when it costs you something. Maybe especially then, this will cost you. Your food, your space, your peace. Maybe. Ruth met his eyes. Or maybe you two will cost me less than being alone has been costing me. Jacob absorbed that, nodded slowly. We'll help. With chores, firewood, whatever you need. I know you will. They stood together in the morning light, strangers bound by circumstance and grief, while the storm outside continued to pile snow higher and the world narrowed to just this cabin, this moment, these fragile connections forming in the wake of loss. Ruth cracked another egg and thought about Providence, about how sometimes the things we need most arrive disguised as burdens, about how a blizzard can trap you with exactly the people you need to meet. She'd opened her door to give shelter. She hadn't realized she was letting hope back in. The second morning brought more snow and the beginning of routine. Small things, mostly. Jacob woke before Ruth and had the fire built up by the time she emerged from the bedroom. She'd insisted on taking turns, and he'd taken the chair last night. Lily appeared a few minutes later, moving quietly, still wrapped in her cocoon of silence. They ate the oatmeal Ruth prepared, sweetened with the last jar of preserves. Not much, but warm and filling. Afterward, Jacob stood at the window, studying the white landscape. I should check the woodpile, he said. See what shape it's in. You don't have to... Ruth started. I know. He was already pulling on his coat. But I'd like to. Need to move around. Ruth understood. Grief made you restless, gave you too much energy with nowhere to put it. Work was a mercy. She watched from the window as Jacob made his way to the woodshed, wading through snow that reached his knees. He was gone for perhaps 20 minutes. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, his expression was thoughtful. You're low on firewood, he said, without preamble. Maybe a week's worth if you stretch it. There's unsplit rounds out there, but the conditions... I know. Ruth kept her voice level. I've been managing. I could split some. There's an axe in the shed. Jacob, you're a guest. I'm a man who knows how to split wood, and who doesn't like sitting idle. He met her eyes. Let me help, please. Ruth heard the unspoken part. Let me be useful. Let me do something that matters. All right, she conceded. But don't overdo it. It's cold out there. Jacob nodded and headed back outside. Through the window, Ruth watched him select a round, position it on the splitting block. His movements were practiced, efficient. The axe fell with a clean crack, the wood splitting evenly. Again, again, the rhythm steady and sure. Lily came to stand beside Ruth. Watching her father work? He knows what he's doing, Ruth said softly. Lily nodded. They stood together in comfortable silence. After a while, Lily wandered to the bookshelf in the corner. A simple pine structure Tom had built, filled with worn volumes collected over decades. The girl's fingers trailed along the spines. Ruth joined her. Tom loved books. He'd read to me every night before bed. Poetry, mostly. Sometimes novels. Lily pulled out a thick volume, studied the cover. Little Women in faded gold letters. That was my favorite when I was your age, Ruth said. My mother's before that. It's about 4 sisters during the Civil War. About family and love and finding your way in the world. Lily opened the book, ran her fingers over the inscription on the first page. To Ruth on your 13th birthday. May you be as brave as Joe. Love always, Mother. She died when I was 16, Ruth said quietly. I've read that book maybe 20 times since. Each time I hear her voice reading it to me. Lily looked at Ruth, something shifting in her expression. Then she held the book against her chest, a question in her eyes. Would you like to read it? Ruth asked. Lily nodded, emphatic this time. Take it. It's yours for as long as you want. Lily's face transformed, not quite a smile, but close. She carried the book to the corner near the fire, settled into the old armchair that had been Tom's favorite, and opened to the first page. Ruth felt a small warmth in her chest. It wasn't much, this tiny connection, but it was something. Jacob came in an hour later, face flushed from exertion and cold. He'd split enough wood to last 2 weeks at least, stacked it neatly under the eave where it would stay dry. There's something else out there, he said, brushing snow from his hair. In the shed. Wood-carving tools. Ruth's breath caught. Those were Tom's. They're good tools, well cared for. Do you? He paused. Do you mind if I use them? Just to keep my hands busy? Ruth thought about those tools, sitting unused for 3 years. Tom would have hated that. He'd always believed tools were meant to be worked, not preserved like museum pieces. He'd be glad someone was using them, she said. Please, help yourself. Jacob went back out to the shed, returned with the wooden box that held Tom's carving knives, chisels and gouges. He also brought a few blocks of seasoned pine. Tom used to carve little animals, Ruth said, watching him arrange the tools on the kitchen table. Gave them to children in town. He said every child should have something special, something made just for them. Jacob selected a small knife, tested its edge with his thumb. My father whittled. Only thing he did that wasn't about business or cattle. He'd sit on the porch at night, working a piece of wood until it became something else. Never knew what he was thinking during those times. Did you learn from him? A little. Before I left, Jacob picked up one of the pine blocks, turned it over in his hands. Haven't done it in years, though. He sat by the fire, and after a moment of consideration, began to work. The knife moved carefully, shaving away thin curls of wood. His focus was complete, almost meditative. Ruth prepared their midday meal, soup again, stretched with more water and some dried beans. Not much, but they weren't complaining. Lily ate half, then returned to her book. Jacob ate while he carved, barely looking up from his work. The afternoon settled into a gentle rhythm. Ruth mended clothes that needed mending, darning socks, patching a tear in Jacob's shirt that he'd left on the chair. Lily read, occasionally glancing up at her father or Ruth. Jacob carved, the soft scraping of knife on wood, a soothing counterpoint to the wind outside. It felt, Ruth thought, almost like a family. The way families used to spend winter evenings before television and computers and constant distraction. Just people in a warm room, each occupied with their own small tasks, drawing comfort from proximity. She watched Jacob's hands move, rough hands, calloused from work, but gentle with the wood. Whatever he was making began to take shape, something with 4 legs, a head, a horse maybe. You're good at that, Ruth said. Jacob looked up, almost startled, as if he'd forgotten she was there. Just muscle memory. It's been a long time. It's beautiful work. He studied the half-formed carving. It's for Lily. She always wanted a horse when she was little. Sarah promised her one when we got settled somewhere. Never happened. His voice caught on his wife's name. Ruth saw the pain flash across his face, there and gone like heat lightning. She'll love it, Ruth said gently. Maybe. He went back to carving. Or maybe she'll just see it as another broken promise. I don't think so. I think she'll see it as love. Jacob's hands stilled. He looked at his daughter, curled in the chair with little women, her face peaceful for the first time since they'd arrived. Then he looked at Ruth, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. 2 people trying to find their way through grief, trying to keep caring for the people who still needed them. Thank you, Jacob said quietly. For this, for all of it, you keep thanking me. Stop that, can't help it. You're giving us something we haven't had in a long time. What's that? A place to just be? No demands, no expectations. Just, he gestured around the cabin. This, Ruth nodded. She understood perfectly. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply not having to pretend you're okay. The evening came early, the way it does in mountain winters. They ate dinner by lamplight. Ruth hoarded the electricity for necessities and sat together by the fire. Jacob carved lily red. Ruth rocked gently in Tom's old chair and marveled at how quickly strangeness became familiar. Outside, the storm continued its relentless work, burying the world. Inside, 3 people who'd been strangers 48 hours ago sat in comfortable silence, each healing in their own way, each giving the others permission to be broken for a while. And in the corner, a small wooden horse took shape, carved with careful hands by a father trying to give his daughter something he couldn't quite put into words. The third morning, Ruth woke with a knot in her stomach. She'd been doing the arithmetic in her head, and the numbers weren't adding up. 3 people eating instead of 1. The food was disappearing faster than she'd planned. She stood at the pantry, counting what remained. 2 jars of canned vegetables, 1 of preserves. The flour was nearly gone. Maybe 3 more days of meals, if she stretched everything impossibly thin. She closed the cabinet door softly, not wanting to worry her guests. But when she turned, Jacob was standing in the kitchen doorway watching her. "Running low," he said. "Not a question. We'll manage." "Ruth," his voice was gentle but firm, "I saw you counting, and I saw what you served yourself last night. Half of what you gave me and Lily. I wasn't that hungry. You're rationing. For us." He came closer, his expression serious. "Let me help. There must be something. When I was outside yesterday, I thought I saw a root cellar." The door half buried near the woodshed. Ruth's eyes widened. "I'd forgotten about that. Tom used to store vegetables down there, preserves from better years. But the steps got icy after he died, and I couldn't—" She stopped, embarrassed. "I couldn't manage them alone." "Show me." They bundled up and went outside together, wading through the snow to the cellar doors angled into the hillside. Jacob brushed away the accumulated snow, revealing the old wooden doors, secured with a simple latch. The metal was frozen. "Stand back," he said, working the latch carefully until it gave with a crack. He pulled the doors open, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "There's a lantern just inside," Ruth said. "Tom always kept it there." Jacob disappeared into the dark, and a moment later, warm light bloomed below. Ruth heard his footsteps on the stone stairs, then a low whistle. "Ruth, there's a lot down here." She made her way carefully down the steps, holding the rail. The cellar opened up into a space carved from the hillside, cool and dry. Shelves lined the walls, and on them, "Oh my," Ruth breathed, jars and jars of preserved vegetables, fruits, jams, sacks of dried beans and lentils. Root vegetables in bins, potatoes, turnips, onions. "Enough food for months, maybe longer. I'd put these up 2 summers ago," Ruth said, touching a jar of tomatoes with wonder. "Tom and I had a good garden that year. We preserved everything, planning for—" Her voice broke. "Planning for a winter we never got to share." Jacob was examining the jars, checking seals, dates. "These are all still good, well preserved. Your husband knew what he was doing. He learned from his mother. She lived through the Depression, never wasted anything." They loaded their arms with jars and vegetables, made 2 trips up the icy steps. Back in the warm cabin, Ruth spread everything on the counter, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. They wouldn't starve. They could eat properly now. Lily appeared, drawn by the activity, her book tucked under her arm. Her eyes widened at the bounty on the counter. "We found treasure," Ruth told her, smiling. "Looks like we're having a proper meal tonight." She pulled out a battered tin box from the shelf above the stove. Inside were recipe cards, some typed, most handwritten in different hands. Her mother's flowing script, her grandmother's careful printing, Ruth's own younger penmanship. "My mother gave me this when I got married," Ruth said, running her fingers over the cards. Recipes handed down through 3 generations. 4, if you count what Tom and I added. Jacob came to look over her shoulder. "That's quite a legacy, the important kind. Anyone can leave money or land. But this," she tapped the box gently, "this is how you pass down love." She selected a card from the middle of the stack. "Vegetable stew, my grandmother's recipe. She made it during the Depression when meat was scarce. Filling and warm and good for the soul. What can I do?" Jacob asked. Ruth looked at him, surprised. Tom had never asked to help in the kitchen. Not because he was unwilling, just because it had been her domain. You can chop the vegetables here. She handed him a knife and cutting board, showed him what she needed. They worked side by side, Ruth explaining each step as they went. Dice the potatoes small. Cut the onions fine, the carrots in thick rounds. Add the dried herbs she'd grown herself, thyme and sage and rosemary. My mother taught me to cook when I was 8, Ruth said, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions. She said a woman who could cook would never go hungry, never be helpless. But it was more than that. She said cooking was about care, about nourishing people you love. My mother died when I was 6, Jacob said quietly, focused on the carrots. My father, he tried, but we mostly lived on simple things. Canned beans, bread and butter. He hired someone eventually, but it wasn't the same. Is that why you left? The ranch? Jacob's knife paused. Part of it. He was a hard man, loving in his way, I suppose, but he didn't know how to show it. Everything was about work, about building, about success. I wanted something simpler, warmer. Did you find it? With Sarah, yes. His voice softened. She was raised by her grandmother after her parents died. The grandmother was all warmth. Baked cookies, sang songs, told stories. Their house always smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. First time I visited, I nearly cried. I didn't know a home could feel like that. Ruth added broth to the pot, stirred gently. And you built that with Sarah. We tried. We were getting there. He set down the knife. Then she was gone, and I didn't know how to keep it warm without her. They both looked at Lily, who'd been watching from the doorway. The girl moved forward slowly, drawn by something in their conversation, or perhaps by the smells beginning to fill the cabin. Would you like to help? Ruth asked gently. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Ruth guided her to the stove, handed her a wooden spoon. Just stir it slowly. Keep it moving, so nothing sticks to the bottom. That's perfect. Lily stirred carefully, her face solemn with concentration. Ruth stood beside her, one hand hovering near, not touching, just present. Jacob watched them both, something easing in his expression. For the next hour, the three of them moved around the small kitchen in a careful dance. Ruth teaching, Jacob helping, Lily participating in her quiet way. The stew bubbled and thickened. The bread Ruth made from the last of the flour, baked until it was golden. The cabin filled with warmth and good smells. When they finally sat down to eat, the food tasted better than any Ruth had made in 3 years. Not because the recipe was special, though it was, but because she'd made it with company, with purpose, with people who needed nourishing. This is incredible, Jacob said after his first bite. Lily nodded emphatically, taking seconds without being asked. Ruth felt tears prick her eyes. Such a simple thing, this meal. But it meant everything. It meant life continuing. It meant caring for people and being cared for in return. It meant the recipes in that battered tin box were still doing their work, passing down love, just like they were meant to. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Jacob had finished the wooden horse and was starting something else, a rabbit this time. Lily had set the horse carefully on the mantel next to Tom's wedding photo, positioning it just so. Your father told me you always wanted a horse, Ruth said to the girl. Lily looked at the carving, then at her father, and for just a moment her hand crept across the space between them and touched his arm. Just a brush of fingers, there and gone. But Jacob's eyes closed, and Ruth saw his throat work as he swallowed. Connection, small but real. A daughter reaching for her father across the canyon of grief. Ruth rocked in Tom's chair and felt grateful. For the food in the cellar, for the recipes in the tin box, for the storm that had brought these two people into her life, for the chance to matter again, to be useful, to give and receive in equal measure. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, but none of them mentioned leaving. Not yet, there was no hurry now. They had food, they had warmth, and they had something none of them had possessed when they'd arrived. They had each other. The 4th day dawned clear. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed. Everything was white and crystalline, the sun reflecting off snow so bright it hurt to look at. Ruth stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the morning light paint the mountains gold. Behind her, she heard Jacob stirring in the chair where he'd slept. They'd been trading off, him one night, her the next. Last night had been his turn. "Pretty," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It's the first clear day since you arrived." They both understood what that meant. The roads would be plowed soon. Life would resume. This strange, suspended time in the cabin would end. Neither of them mentioned it. Lily appeared, hair uncombed, still in the oversized shirt she slept in. She'd been moving more freely these past days, the rigid tension in her shoulders easing. She came to the window, pressed her hand against the cold glass. "Do you want to go outside after breakfast?" Ruth asked. "See the snow in the light?" Lily nodded, almost eager. They ate quickly. Oatmeal with preserved peaches, real luxury now that they had access to the cellar, and then bundled into their warmest clothes. Outside the cold was sharp, but the air was still. Everything glittered. Lily trudged through the snow toward the tree line, stopping to examine the way sunlight filtered through ice-laden branches. Jacob followed at a distance, giving her space but keeping watch. Ruth stayed on the porch, leaning against the railing, content to observe. When they came back inside an hour later, cheeks flushed and eyes bright, Lily went straight to her bag in the bedroom. Ruth heard rustling, the sound of zippers opening and closing. Then the girl emerged holding something small, a music box. Wooden, hand-carved, beautiful despite its age. Lily carried it to the kitchen table where Ruth was preparing lunch. She set it down carefully, then looked at Ruth with an expression Ruth couldn't quite read. Permission, maybe. Or trust. "What's this?" Ruth asked gently. Lily's fingers traced the carved lid. She glanced toward the living room where Jacob was stoking the fire, then back at Ruth. "Do you want to show me?" Ruth asked. Lily nodded. Jacob appeared in the doorway, saw the music box, and his face transformed. "Lily, sweetheart." The girl looked at him, and Ruth saw a whole conversation happen in that glance. Jacob came closer, sat down at the table. "That was your mother's," he said softly. "Her grandmother made it for her when she was young." Lily wound the key on the side slowly, her movements reverent. Then she opened the lid. Music spilled out. A lullaby, simple and sweet, the notes slightly tinny from the mechanical works, but achingly beautiful. Ruth recognized it instantly, though she couldn't name it. Just the kind of melody a mother would sing to a child, full of gentleness and promises. Lily sat very still, listening. Her eyes began to fill with tears. "Sarah used to sing that to her every night," Jacob said, his own voice thick. "When Lily was little, when she was sick, when she had bad dreams. Always that song." The music continued its delicate revolution. Lily's face crumpled, and suddenly tears were streaming down her cheeks, not silent this time, but accompanied by harsh, gasping breaths. The sound of grief finally released. Ruth didn't think. She moved around the table and opened her arms. Lily collapsed into them. The girl sobbed against Ruth's shoulder, great wrenching cries that shook her whole body. Ruth held her tight, one hand cradling her head, the other rubbing her back in slow circles. The same way she'd comforted countless children over the years, the same way her own mother had comforted her. "That's it," Ruth murmured. "Let it out, sweet girl. Let it all out." Jacob sat with his hands pressed to his face, his own tears leaking between his fingers. The music box played its lullaby, winding down slowly until the notes grew further apart, then stopped altogether. But Lily kept crying. All the grief she'd been holding, all the words she couldn't say, poured out in those sobs. Ruth simply held her, rocking gently, letting the girl fall apart in a safe place. When the storm finally passed, Lily pulled back, her face blotchy and wet. She looked at Ruth and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you," not spoken aloud, but clear enough. Ruth cupped her face, wiped away tears with her thumbs. "You don't have to thank me. You don't have to thank anyone for letting you grieve." Lily nodded, then turned to her father. Jacob opened his arms, and she went to him, letting him hold her while she caught her breath. Ruth stood, giving them space, her own eyes wet. She thought of Tom, of the year after he died when she'd cried every day. How healing those tears had been, even though they hurt. How necessary it was to feel the pain, instead of running from it. The afternoon settled into quiet industry. They'd found a rhythm now, this makeshift family. Small tasks performed together. Jacob mending the broken chair he'd noticed on the first day, Ruth organizing the pantry now that it was well stocked, Lily arranging books on the shelf in some order only she understood. They worked mostly in silence, but it was comfortable. The kind of silence that comes from people who've given each other something valuable. Witness, acceptance, space to be broken. Ruth found herself watching Jacob as he worked on the chair, noting things she'd missed before. His hands, yes, but also the quality of his clothes beneath the wear. The leather belt with its subtle craftsmanship. The boots that had once been very fine. The way he moved with quiet confidence, like someone used to being in charge, even if he'd abdicated that position. "Jacob," she said carefully, "this ranch you're going to, it's quite large, isn't it?" His hands stilled. "What makes you say that?" "Just things. The way you talk about it. The land near Jackson Hole. That's serious ranching country. Expensive country." Jacob set down the screwdriver he'd been using. "It's sizable. My father built it over 40 years. My grandfather started it before that, and it's just been sitting empty. There's a property manager, staff who maintain things. But yes, the main house has been empty since my father died 2 years ago." Ruth absorbed this. Staff, property manager. This wasn't some modest ranch. This was wealth. "Real wealth. Why did you leave?" she asked. "Because I didn't want that life. My father was consumed by it, building, acquiring, managing. He lost my mother and turned to work instead of grief. Lost me because I couldn't watch him disappear into it." Jacob looked at his daughter, who was absorbed in her books across the room. "I wanted something simpler, something that felt like living instead of achieving. And now you're going back. Now I don't have a choice. Lily needs stability. Needs therapy, school, a real home. I can't give her that living out of my truck and working odd jobs." He met Ruth's eyes. "The money is there whether I want it or not. Might as well use it to help her." Ruth nodded slowly. She understood the conflict in him, the man who'd run from wealth now forced to embrace it for his daughter's sake. The burden of inherited responsibility. "That's wise," she said. "But hard. Everything's hard lately." That evening Ruth pulled out an old photo album she hadn't opened in 2 years. Tom in a dozen different contexts. Building the cabin, splitting wood, holding up a string of fish, sitting on the porch with his arm around Ruth. Pictures of a life well lived, simply and with joy. Jacob and Lily looked through it with her, asking questions, listening to stories. Ruth found herself laughing at memories that had only made her cry before. "You two looked happy," Jacob said, studying the wedding photo more closely. "We were. Not every day, life isn't like that. But overall, yes. We built something good together." Jacob traced the edge of the photo with his finger. "That's what I want for Lily, what Sarah and I were building. I just don't know how to do it alone." "You're not alone," Ruth said softly. "Not anymore." Jacob looked up, met her eyes. "Neither are you." And in that moment, Ruth understood that something fundamental had shifted. They'd come together as strangers seeking shelter, but they were leaving as something else, something that didn't have a name yet, but felt like the beginning of family. The 5th morning, Ruth woke to find Jacob already gone outside. Through the window, she could see him checking the road conditions, wading through snow to see how passable things had become. The county plow would come soon. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Their time here was running out. Ruth moved through the cabin, straightening things automatically. That's when she saw it. A leather journal on the floor beside the chair where Jacob had slept. It must have fallen from his coat pocket during the night. She bent to pick it up, intending to set it on the table. But the journal had fallen open, and her eyes caught on the words before she could stop herself. "Dear Lily, I don't know how to reach you. I see your mother in your eyes, and it breaks me all over again. I'm failing you just like I failed her. I failed my father. I fail everyone who depends on me. Maybe you'd be better off." The entry stopped there, unfinished. The date was 3 weeks ago. Ruth's heart clenched. She knew she shouldn't be reading this, knew it was private. But the pain in those words, the raw self-condemnation, she couldn't just ignore it. She carefully closed the journal and set it on the table just as Jacob came back inside. stamping snow from his boots. Road still blocked, he said. But I can see where the plow's been working down the mountain. Maybe by this afternoon. He stopped, seeing the journal on the table. His face went carefully neutral. That fell out of my coat. I know. I picked it up. Ruth took a breath. I saw what was written. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. Jacob's jaw tightened. He crossed to the table, picked up the journal, started to put it in his coat pocket. Jacob, Ruth said gently. Wait, he stopped, his back to her. What you wrote, it's not true. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've watched you with Lily these past days. I've seen how you care for her, how you try even when you're drowning yourself. That's not failing. That's love. Jacob turned slowly. I pulled her out of school, dragged her away from everything familiar, made her live out of a truck because I couldn't face my own responsibilities. You took her away from a place where neither of you could breathe. That's not the same thing. I'm supposed to be her father, supposed to protect her, provide for her, help her heal. Instead, His voice broke. I'm just as lost as she is. Ruth moved closer. Sit down, please. Jacob hesitated, then slumped into a chair. Ruth sat across from him, the way they'd sat so many mornings now, coffee between them and honesty building like layers of snow. I think you need to tell me everything, Ruth said. Not just pieces, everything. For a long moment, Jacob just stared at the table. Then slowly the story came out. His father, James Lanning, had built Lanning Ranch Holdings from a modest cattle operation into something vast, 15,000 acres of prime Wyoming rangeland, 3 smaller satellite ranches, mineral rights, timber contracts, the kind of empire that made you wealthy beyond most people's comprehension. But James had built it alone. After Jacob's mother died when Jacob was 6, poured all his grief into acquisition and management, became hard, distant, demanding, expected Jacob to follow in his footsteps, to love the land and the business the way James did. I tried, Jacob said. God knows I tried. Worked alongside him every summer, learned the business. But I hated it. Hated the constant focus on profit margins and expansion. Hated how he treated the land like a commodity instead of something alive. Hated most of all how he couldn't see me, just saw a future version of himself. So at 18, Jacob left. Took nothing but his truck and his clothes. Worked ranches across Montana and Wyoming, never staying long, never putting down roots. Living simply, living free. Then I met Sarah at a county fair in Bozeman. She was visiting her grandmother. She saw me, really saw me, and she didn't care about my last name or where I came from. We got married 6 months later. Had Lily a year after that. They'd lived modestly. Jacob worked as a ranch hand, Sarah as a teacher's aide. They rented a small house, grew their own vegetables, made their life about each other and their daughter. It wasn't much by conventional measures, but it was rich in the ways that mattered. Then 2 years ago, James died. Massive stroke. Gone before the ambulance arrived. The lawyer found Jacob through old employment records, told him everything had been left to him. The ranch, the holdings, all of it. Net worth somewhere north of $100 million. There was a letter too, Jacob said quietly. From my father. I couldn't read it, couldn't face it. Just signed the papers, putting everything in trust, hired the property manager to keep things running, and went back to my life. Sarah wanted you to reconcile with it, Ruth guessed. She did. Said I couldn't run from it forever. Said we could use the resources to do good, to be different than my father. She had plans, programs for struggling families, scholarships, land conservation. She saw possibility where I only saw burden. His voice roughened. We were going to visit the ranch that Christmas. Going to take Lily, show her where I came from, start figuring out what came next. Then Sarah died, and I couldn't face the ranch, couldn't face the money, couldn't face anything. So I took Lily and started driving. Thought if I kept moving, I could outrun it all. But you can't, Ruth said softly. No, you can't. He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. I've been carrying my father's letter for 2 years. Never opened it, too afraid of what it might say. Too afraid of, he stopped, of forgiving him, Ruth finished. Of letting go of your anger. Jacob nodded mutely. Ruth reached across the table, took his hand. Legacy is a strange thing. Tom taught me that. He inherited this land from his parents, just 5 acres, nothing like what you've got. But it felt like an anchor to him at first, this responsibility he hadn't asked for. Then he realized something. A legacy isn't a prison. It's what you choose to do with what you've been given. I don't know how to choose. Yes, you do. You're already choosing. You're going back to that ranch, taking Lily home. That's a choice. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like surrender. Maybe that's what wisdom is, Ruth said. Knowing when to stop fighting what's meant to be. Your father left you resources. Use them to build the life Sarah dreamed of. Not for him, for her. For Lily, for yourself. Jacob sat quietly absorbing this. Finally he said, "Will you help me read it?" "The letter?" "Not yet," Ruth said. "Wait until you're ready." "You'll know when." They heard footsteps, Lily emerging from the bedroom, drawn perhaps by their voices. She came to the kitchen, saw them sitting close, her father's face wet with tears. Without hesitation, she crossed to him and leaned against his shoulder. Jacob's arm went around her automatically, pulled her close. She didn't pull away. Ruth watched them and felt something like grace moving through the cabin. These two, finding their way back to each other, learning to carry their grief together instead of alone. "I think," Jacob said, looking at his daughter. "We're going to be all right, eventually," Lily nodded against his shoulder. "Eventually is enough," Ruth said. "It's more than we had yesterday." The sun climbed higher outside, melting the snow in steady drips from the eaves. Inside, 3 people sat in the kitchen's warmth, each carrying burdens, but no longer carrying them alone. And somewhere in Jacob's coat pocket, a letter from a dead father waited to be read. To offer whatever absolution the living can grant to the departed. The sound woke them all, the deep rumble of heavy machinery, the scrape of metal on asphalt. The county snowplow working its way up the mountain road. Ruth sat up in bed, heart pounding. She'd known it was coming, but the reality of it hit differently than the anticipation. Jacob and Lily could leave now. Would leave. Why would they stay? She dressed slowly, pulled on Tom's old sweater for comfort, and emerged to find Jacob already at the window, watching the plow work its way closer. His expression was unreadable. Lily sat curled in the armchair, her book forgotten in her lap. She looked small suddenly, younger than her 15 years. "Morning," Ruth said quietly. Jacob turned. "Morning. The plow's about a half-mile down. Road should be clear enough to drive by noon." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. They ate breakfast in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Ruth noticed Lily barely touched her food, just pushed it around her plate. Jacob kept glancing at his daughter, then at Ruth, then out the window. After breakfast, Jacob stood abruptly. "I should check the truck. Make sure it'll start after sitting in the cold all this time." "I'll come with you," Ruth said. They walked together through the snow, which had settled and compressed overnight. The sun was bright, almost harsh after so many days of gray. At the road's edge, they could see where Jacob and Lily had abandoned their truck when it slid into the ditch. Jacob waded down to it, pulled the driver's door open. The interior looked intact, just cold. He tried the engine. It turned over reluctantly, coughed, then caught. He let it run for a moment, then shut it off. "It's fine," he said. "I can dig it out, get it back on the road." Ruth nodded. Neither of them moved. "Jacob," she started, then stopped. What was she trying to say? "Don't go, stay. I'll miss you." He reached into the truck's glove box, pulled out a manila envelope. "There's something I need to show you. Something I should have shown you days ago." They trudged back to the cabin. Inside, Jacob set the envelope on the table. Lily watched from the corner, her book clutched to her chest like a shield. "The night we arrived," Jacob said, "you asked who I was. I told you my name, but I didn't tell you everything." He opened the envelope, pulled out official-looking documents. "I'd like to be honest with you now. Completely honest." Ruth sat down, and Jacob pushed the papers across to her. She saw letterhead first, law firm she recognized as the kind that handled estates for very wealthy people. Then her eyes found the name repeated across multiple documents. Jacob Lanning, 4, principal shareholder, Lanning Ranch Holdings, LLC. The next sheet was a financial summary. Ruth's eyes widened as she scanned the numbers. Properties valued in the tens of millions. investment portfolios, mineral rights worth more than she could comprehend. The total at the bottom made her dizzy. 114 million, Jacob said quietly. That was the valuation 2 years ago. It's probably more now. Ruth looked up at him, speechless. My father built an empire. My grandfather started it. And I'm the last Lanning, so it all came to me whether I wanted it or not. He laughed bitterly. Irony is, I'd give every penny to have Sarah back, or to have had my father be the kind of man who valued people more than property. Ruth set the papers down with trembling hands. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know who I am. And because he reached into his coat, pulled out another envelope. Holder worn at the edges. I'm ready to read my father's letter, and I'd like you to be with me when I do. Ruth's throat tightened. Jacob, that's private. Between you and him, please. I trust you. And I need someone here, someone who understands about complicated fathers and inheritance, and trying to honor the dead while still being yourself. She nodded slowly. All right. Jacob opened the envelope carefully as if it might shatter. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in shaky handwriting. He unfolded it and Ruth moved closer so they could read together. Jacob, my son, it began, I was not the father you deserved. I built an empire but lost my family building it. Your mother's death hardened me when I should have let it soften me. I drove you away with demands and disappointment, but you were right to leave, right to choose your own path. I was wrong. I've arranged everything so you can do with this legacy as you see fit. Sell it all, keep it, transform it. That's your choice now, not mine. I only hope you'll come back to the land someday. Not for me, but because it's in your blood, whether you want it or not. Wyoming made us, Jacob. It doesn't have to define us, but it's always home. I hope you'll forgive me. I hope you found what I couldn't give you, warmth, softness, joy in simple things. I hope you built the life I should have wanted, instead of the one I demanded. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But maybe that means you're finally ready to come back. Not to become me, but to be yourself on land that's yours now. That's all I can ask, your father. The silence after Ruth finished reading felt sacred. She looked at Jacob, saw tears streaming down his face. He wasn't trying to hide them anymore. He knew, Jacob whispered. He knew he was wrong. He knew, Ruth agreed. And he set you free. Jacob pressed his hands to his face, shoulders shaking. Ruth gave him space to feel it, this complicated grief for a complicated man. Not just sadness, but relief, anger, gratitude, regret, all tangled together. When he finally lowered his hands, he said, I need to go back to the ranch. Take Lily home, real home. Give her stability, therapy, everything she needs to heal. Yes, Ruth said. You do. The main house. It's big, empty. There's a guest house, too, on the property. Comfortable, private. He looked at her directly. Come with us, Ruth's breath caught. What? Come to the ranch. Help us figure this out. Lily's attached to you, I can see it. She's been through so much change, so much loss. Having you there would... He stopped, started again. I'm not saying this right. I'm not asking you to be hired help or anything like that. I'm asking you to be family. If you want to be, Ruth stared at him, mind reeling. Leave the cabin. Leave Tom's memory. Go live on some vast ranch with people she'd known less than a week. I can't, she heard herself say. I barely know you. This is my home. My life, is it? Jacob asked gently. Or is it where you've been hiding? The words hit like a slap, but Ruth knew they were true. Tom had made her promise to keep living. But she'd been doing the opposite, shrinking her world, rationing her days, waiting to die. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Terrified, actually. Of going back there, of taking on all that responsibility, of failing Lily again. But I'm less scared with you there. You've given us something this week, not just shelter, but hope. A reminder that broken people can still care for each other. Lily had moved closer during their conversation. Now she stood beside her father, looking at Ruth with those dark eyes that had started to lose some of their haunted quality. The girl didn't speak, but she held out her hand. An offering, an invitation. Ruth looked at that outstretched hand, at Jacob's desperate hope, at the life being offered to her. Then she looked around the cabin, Tom's coat by the door, their wedding photo on the mantel, the accumulated weight of 3 years of grief. "I need time to think," she said. It's too much too fast." "Of course," Jacob said. "We can stay another night if you want. Give you space to decide." "No," Ruth said firmly. "You need to go. Lily needs to get to that ranch, start her real healing. She took a breath. "I'll think about it. Give me a week. You can write down the address. Tell me how to find you." Jacob nodded slowly. "All right, that's fair." But neither of them moved toward packing. They stood in the kitchen that had become their shared space, none of them quite ready to break the spell of these strange days together. Finally, Lily did something extraordinary. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ruth. Ruth held her tight, felt the girl's heartbeat against her own, felt the trust, the affection, the silent plea. When Lily pulled back, Ruth saw her lips form 2 words, "Please come," and Ruth, looking into those eyes, knew that whatever she decided, nothing would ever be quite the same again. They packed in the afternoon, Jacob and Lily gathering their few belongings, while Ruth moved through the cabin with restless energy, straightening things that didn't need straightening, cleaning what was already clean. She watched them prepare to leave and felt something tearing inside her. The cabin would be so quiet when they were gone, so empty. Just her and the memories again, the slow countdown toward nothing. Jacob worked methodically, checking the truck, loading their bags. He'd managed to get the vehicle back on the road with surprising ease. The man knew his way around machinery and effort. Lily helped where she could, but Ruth noticed the girl kept looking back at the cabin, at Ruth, her expression uncertain. "We should go soon," Jacob said, coming back inside one last time. "Get to the ranch before dark." "It's about 4 hours from here." Ruth nodded, throat tight. "You'll drive carefully?" "Always do." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, handed it to her. "The address, and my phone number. The main house has service, decent reception for that part of Wyoming. Call if you—" He stopped. "Call when you decide." Either way, Ruth took the paper, folded it carefully. "I will." Lily came to Ruth one more time, hugged her fiercely. Ruth held her close, breathed in the smell of her hair, cheap shampoo and wood smoke, and something sweetly young underneath. "Be well," Ruth whispered. "Let yourself heal." Then they were walking to the truck, Jacob helping Lily into the passenger seat, closing the door. He turned back to Ruth one last time. "Thank you," he said. "For everything." "For saving us." "You saved me too," Ruth replied, and realized it was true. She watched from the porch as the truck pulled away, tires crunching on the packed snow. Watched until it disappeared around the bend and the sound of the engine faded to nothing. Then she went inside and closed the door. The silence was immediate and absolute. No footsteps overhead, no quiet murmur of voices, no fire crackling because Jacob wasn't there to tend it. Just Ruth and the empty spaces where people had been. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around. Everything was the same as it had been a week ago. The furniture in the same places. Tom's coat still by the door. The wedding photo still on the mantel. But Ruth herself had changed. She felt it in her bones, some fundamental shift, like ice breaking up after a long freeze. She made coffee from habit, sat at the kitchen table where she'd sat with Jacob so many mornings. The chair across from her was empty now. Would always be empty unless what? Unless she went? The idea was absurd. She was 66 years old. She didn't know these people, not really. A week together in extreme circumstances didn't make a family. It didn't make sense to upend her entire life for strangers, except they didn't feel like strangers anymore. Ruth pulled out an old envelope from the drawer, turned it over to the blank backside, found a pen, drew a line down the middle. At the top of one column she wrote "stay." At the top of the other, "go." Under "stay" she began, "safe, familiar, independent. Tom's memory here. No risk of new loss." She stared at the words. They looked right. They should have felt right, but they didn't. Under "go," she wrote, "scary, unknown, dependent, leaving Tom behind." That didn't feel right either. Ruth crossed out both columns, frustrated with herself. She was framing this all wrong, asking the wrong questions. She started again, this time writing the truth. Under "stay," alone, slowly dying. Safe but not alive. Rationing days until there are none left. Undergo. Connected, purposeful, afraid but living. Opening to possibility. She stared at the new list for a long time. Then she added one more line. Undergo. Honor what Tom taught me about love. Tom had loved generously, openly. He'd built a life with her based on care and partnership. He'd made her promise to keep living. Sitting alone in this cabin waiting for death wasn't living. It was the opposite of everything he'd valued. Ruth thought about Lily's face as they'd driven away, hopeful and heartbroken at once. Thought about Jacob trying so hard to be what his daughter needed while carrying his own devastation. Thought about how, for 6 days, she'd felt needed again, useful, connected to something beyond her own grief. What do I do, Tom? She asked the empty room. In her mind she heard his voice, not imagined but remembered. Something he'd said years ago during a difficult time when Ruth had been afraid to take a risk. The things worth doing are usually the things that scare us, Ruthie. Safe choices keep us breathing. Brave choices keep us living. Ruth closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in this kitchen 5 years ago. Tom had just been diagnosed with the heart condition that would eventually kill him. The doctor had recommended surgery, risky at his age, but potentially life-saving. I'm scared, Ruth had said. Me too, Tom had replied. But I want more time with you. Even if it's risky, I want to try. Because what's the alternative? Give up now. I'm not ready to stop living, Ruth, not while I still have you. He'd had the surgery. It had bought them 3 more good years. 3 more years of mornings in this kitchen, evenings by the fire, Tom's hand in hers. 3 years they wouldn't have had if he'd chosen safe instead of brave. And at the end, on his last day, Tom had made her promise. She'd been holding his hand, watching him sleep in the hospital bed they'd set up in the living room. He'd opened his eyes, looked at her with such clarity despite the morphine. Ruth, promise me something, anything. Don't become a ghost in our house. When I'm gone, and I'm going soon, we both know it. Don't let grief turn you into a shadow. Keep living. Promise me. Keep living, she'd promised. Through tears, but she'd promised. And then he'd closed his eyes and slipped away so quietly she almost didn't notice the moment he left. Ruth opened her eyes in the present, tears streaming down her face. I haven't kept my promise, she whispered. I'm sorry, Tom. I haven't been living. I've been hiding. She looked down at the list on the envelope. The choice was obvious now, had always been obvious. She'd just been too scared to see it. Ruth stood decisively, went to the bedroom, pulled out the old suitcase from under the bed, started packing. Clothes, toiletries, the photo of Tom, the recipe box, small treasures she couldn't leave behind. She was folding a sweater when she heard it. A sound outside. An engine. Her heart leaped. She went to the window. Jacob's truck was pulling up to the cabin. Ruth's hands flew to her mouth. They'd come back. Why had they come back? She opened the door before they could knock. Jacob stood on the porch, Lily beside him. They both looked uncertain. We got about 10 miles down the road, Jacob said. Had to pull over. Why? What's wrong? Lily, he looked at his daughter. She has something to say to you. Ruth looked at the girl, saw her struggling with something, her mouth opening and closing. Then in a voice rusty from disuse but absolutely clear, Lily spoke. Please. One word, but it broke something open in Ruth's chest, Lily continued. The words coming slowly, carefully, like someone remembering how to walk after a long illness. Please come with us. You make it hurt less. Don't go away too. Ruth couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the enormity of this moment. Lily speaking after 4 months of silence, to ask Ruth to stay in her life. We shouldn't have left, Jacob said, his voice thick. The second we drove away, I knew it was wrong. Lily knew it too. We need you, Ruth, both of us. However you can be there, guest, advisor, friend, family, we need you. Ruth looked at them both, these people who'd stumbled into her life through a blizzard. Then she looked past them at the suitcase, visible through the open bedroom door. She started to laugh, a surprised, joyful sound that startled them all. I was packing, she managed. I was coming to find you, Jacob's face transformed. You were? Tom made me promise to keep living. I haven't been living. I've been existing barely." She looked at Lily. "And you spoke. You found your voice." Lily nodded, and now she was smiling, really smiling, something Ruth hadn't seen before. "Yes," Ruth said firmly. "Yes, I'll come. I want to come. I want to—" Her voice caught. "I want to be part of your family. If you'll have me." Lily crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around Ruth. Jacob followed, and the three of them stood in a tight embrace on the porch while the afternoon sun painted everything gold. When they finally pulled apart, Ruth said, "I need to finish packing, and there are things I should secure here before we go. The cabin, I'll come back eventually, check on it." "Take your time," Jacob said. "We'll help." They worked together, these three who were choosing each other. Ruth packed what mattered, left what didn't. They loaded the truck, secured the cabin, made sure everything was safe for an extended absence. Before they left, Ruth stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the empty room, at Tom's coat still on its peg, at their wedding photo on the mantel. "I'm not leaving you," she told his memory. "I'm taking you with me, taking everything you taught me about love and kindness and living bravely. I'm keeping my promise, Tom. Finally." She placed the envelope with her list inside the wedding photo frame, leaving it on the mantel. A record of the choice she'd made, the life she'd chosen. Then Ruth locked the door and joined Jacob and Lily in the truck. As they drove away from the cabin, Lily sat between Ruth and Jacob, holding both their hands. They were heading toward something unknown, something that terrified and exhilarated Ruth in equal measure, but they were heading toward it together, and that made all the difference. The drive to Jackson Hole took them through country that grew progressively more beautiful and more intimidating. Mountains rose higher, valleys spread wider, and the occasional ranch they passed made Ruth's breath catch at their scale. Jacob drove steadily, pointing out landmarks, a creek where he'd fished as a boy, a mesa where eagles nested, a stand of aspens that turned gold in autumn. His voice carried affection. He didn't try to hide anymore, and Ruth realized this land was part of him, whether he'd wanted it to be or not. Lily sat between them, speaking occasionally now. Small observations, quiet questions. Each word was a gift after 4 months of silence. Ruth cherished everyone. "That's where we'll go to school," Jacob said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Good school." "Small classes." "They'll be patient with you." Lily nodded, not afraid, just taking it in. They stopped for lunch at a small diner, and Ruth insisted on paying despite Jacob's protests. She needed to contribute something, even if it was just a meal. Jacob understood, didn't push. As they ate, Ruth watched the other diners, ranchers mostly from the look of them. Weathered faces, practical clothes. They nodded at Jacob, some recognition in their eyes. He was known here, whether he'd been present or not. The Lanning name carried weight. Back in the truck, Ruth felt nervousness building. What was she doing? These people had money, land, a whole life she couldn't comprehend. How would she fit into that? As if sensing her tension, Jacob said quietly, "It's just land, Ruth, dirt and grass and sky. It doesn't make me different than the man who sat by your fire." Ruth nodded, not entirely convinced. They turned onto a private road, following fence line that seemed to go on forever. The late afternoon sun painted everything amber and gold. Ruth saw cattle in the distance, horses in closer pastures, buildings that spoke of wealth managed with care. Finally, the main gates came into view, massive iron structures, maybe 12 feet tall, with Lanning Ranch wrought into the metalwork in letters 2 feet high. They were impressive, beautiful even, but also imposing. A statement of ownership and permanence. Jacob stopped the truck before driving through. He turned to face both Ruth and Lily, his expression serious. "Before we go through these gates, I need to say something. This place, it broke my family. My grandfather built it with obsession. My father maintained it with devotion, and it cost both of them everything warm in their lives. Every close relationship, every moment of simple joy, sacrificed to acquisition and management." He looked at his daughter. "I'm not doing that. If we're doing this, and I think we have to for your sake, we're doing it differently, with heart, with balance. The ranch will serve us, not the other way around." He turned to Ruth. "And you're not a guest or an employee. Your family, if that's okay with you. Equal partner in whatever we build here. I'll need your wisdom, your heart, your honesty. Lily needs you. I need you. Ruth's eyes filled. I'm honored. And yes, that's more than okay. Lily reached for both their hands, linked them together. I like our family, she said softly, the words still careful but growing stronger. Jacob smiled, really smiled. Maybe the first genuine one Ruth had seen. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. He put the truck in gear and drove through the gates. The private road wound through snow-covered pastures. They passed barns bigger than Ruth's entire property, equipment sheds that could house a dozen trucks, worker housing that looked comfortable and well-maintained. Everything spoke of resources managed thoughtfully. In the distance, the main house came into view. It wasn't ostentatious, no columns or fountains or pretension, but it was substantial. 3 stories of log and stone, built to last generations. Large windows faced the mountains. Smoke rose from one of several chimneys. As they pulled up to the main entrance, the front door opened. A woman emerged, maybe 65, with iron-gray hair pulled into a practical bun, wearing jeans and a wool sweater. Her face was weathered but kind, her eyes sharp with intelligence. "Jacob Lanning," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "About time you came home." Jacob climbed out of the truck and the woman pulled him into a fierce hug. He returned it, holding tight. "Ruth, Lily," he said when they pulled apart. "This is Margaret Hale. She was our housekeeper when I was growing up, knew my mother before she died. After I left, she maintained the property, kept everything ready. Margaret, this is Ruth Calder and my daughter Lily." Margaret's sharp eyes swept over them both, taking in their worn clothes, Lily's uncertain posture, Ruth's proud bearing despite obvious poverty. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her because she nodded approvingly. "You've been through something," she said simply. "All of you. Well, come inside. I've got stew on and beds made up. Time enough for everything else after you've eaten and rested." She turned and led the way into the house. And Ruth, heart pounding but resolute, followed her into this new life that was just beginning. Inside, the house surprised Ruth. She'd expected cold grandeur, museum-quality furniture, the sterile perfection of wealth on display. Instead, she found warmth. Wood-paneled walls glowed honey-colored in the afternoon light. Stone fireplaces anchored each main room. Large windows framed the mountains like living paintings. The furniture was quality but comfortable. Leather worn soft with use, rugs thick underfoot, surfaces that showed the marks of actual living. "Your father didn't change much after your mother died," Margaret said, leading them through to the kitchen. "Kept it like she'd left it, like she might walk back through the door any day. I think he hoped for things that didn't happen. The kitchen was massive but somehow homey. Commercial-grade appliances sat alongside a well-used wooden table that could seat a dozen. Copper pots hung from racks. Herbs grew in pots on the windowsill. It smelled like Margaret's promised stew, rich and savory. Ruth immediately felt the urge to help. She set her bag down, moved toward the counter. "What can I do?" Margaret turned, studied her. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to. But I'd like to." "Let me help." Margaret's expression softened. "There's bread that needs slicing." Plates in that cabinet. They worked together, falling into easy rhythm. Ruth understood kitchens, understood the language of shared tasks. This at least she could do. Jacob and Lily stood somewhat awkwardly in the doorway until Margaret shooed them out. "Go show them the house proper. Let Ruth and me handle this." After they left, Margaret said quietly, "He's been gone a long time. I worried about him. He's had a hard few years. I heard about his wife. Terrible thing. And the girl not speaking." Margaret shook her head. "But she spoke to you just now. Getting out of the truck, I heard her. She found her voice today. Asked me to come with them." Margaret looked at Ruth with new understanding. "You're the reason they're here, aren't you? You're why he finally came home. I think we all needed each other." "Well," Margaret set down her spoon, "then I'm grateful you're here. This house has been empty too long. Needs life in it again." They ate Margaret's stew at the kitchen table, thick with beef and vegetables, perfect after the long drive. Lily ate with genuine appetite, and Ruth realized the girl was starting to heal. Small signs, but unmistakable. After dinner, Jacob showed them through the house properly. The formal rooms, parlor, dining room, study, that his father had used for business. "We don't have to use these," he said. "Can make them something else. Whatever makes sense." They climbed the wide staircase to the second floor. A hallway stretched the length of the house, doors on either side. On one wall hung a series of portraits, formal oil paintings in heavy frames. "The Lanning patriarchs," Jacob said, gesturing. "My great-great-grandfather, who homesteaded the first 1,000 acres. His son, who tripled the holdings. My grandfather, who built it into a real operation. And my father." They walked slowly along the gallery. Each man stared out from his frame, unsmiling. Dressed in their best, but with faces that suggested life was serious business, not to be enjoyed. "They all look miserable," Lily observed. And there was something almost funny about her matter-of-fact assessment. Jacob laughed, surprised and pleased. They were, or at least my father and grandfather were, too focused on building and keeping to enjoy what they had. Ruth studied the final portrait, Jacob's father, probably in his 60s when it was painted. Strong-jawed, stone-faced, but with eyes that looked haunted. "Lonely. He looked sad," Ruth said softly. Jacob nodded. "He was, especially after my mother died. I was only 10. He didn't know how to be soft anymore, how to be a father and not just a rancher. So he put everything into this place. He turned away from the portraits. I'm not doing that. Not going to end up like them, successful and empty." They continued down the hall. Jacob showed Ruth a suite of rooms, bedroom, sitting area, private bath. "This was meant to be guest quarters, but it's yours. For as long as you want it." The space was bigger than her entire cabin. Ruth felt overwhelmed. "Jacob, this is too much. It's just space. Space doesn't mean anything if it's empty." He moved to the windows. View of the mountains. "Sunrise comes up right there. Thought you might like that." Ruth joined him at the window. The vista was breathtaking. Peaks still snow-covered, valleys falling away in every direction. Sky vast and endless. "It's beautiful," she admitted. Lily's room was next door, bright, spacious, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat perfect for reading. The girl's face lit up when she saw it. "Mum's music box can go here," she said, touching the windowsill. "Where the light hits it." "Perfect spot," Jacob agreed, his voice catching. His room was down the hall, positioned to hear if Lily needed him. When he showed them, Ruth noticed the simple way he'd arranged things. Nothing grand, just a man's practical space. They reconvened in the main living room. Fire crackling, evening falling outside. Margaret had said good night, left them to settle. Lily curled up on the couch, the wooden horse Jacob had carved placed carefully beside her. Ruth sat in a chair that faced the mountains. Jacob stood at the window, hands in his pockets. "Is this home?" Lily asked quietly. Jacob turned, looked at his daughter, then at Ruth. "It can be. If we make it that. Home isn't really a place. It's people choosing to stay together." "Then yes," Ruth said. "This is home." And somehow, impossibly, it felt true. The morning sun broke through the clouds for the first time in 8 days, casting long shadows across the fresh snow. Ruth stood at her kitchen window, watching the light transform the white landscape into something that looked almost hopeful. Behind her, the cabin felt different now, fuller somehow, even though it held the same worn furniture and creaking floorboards it always had. Jacob sat at her table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, staring at nothing in particular. Lily was outside, her laughter drifting through the window as she helped clear the porch steps. The sound still surprised Ruth every time she heard it. That girl who had arrived silent as a ghost now sang while she worked, her voice carrying on the cold air like a promise kept. "The roads will be clear by tomorrow," Jacob said quietly. He didn't look at Ruth when he spoke. "County always gets the plows out after a storm like this." Ruth nodded, though he wasn't looking to see it. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him, the same way they'd sat for 8 mornings now. 8 days of shared meals and quiet conversations. 8 days of watching walls come down, brick by careful brick. "You'll want to get back to your ranch, I expect," Ruth said. Her voice was steady, practiced. She'd spent 40 years learning how to sound composed when her heart was doing otherwise. Jacob finally met her eyes. That's what I should want, he said. That's what I came out here trying to figure out. Whether I could go back to that life, that big empty house, those people who work for me but don't know me. Whether I could raise Lily there in all that silence and space. And did you figure it out? He smiled then, just slightly. It changed his whole face, made him look younger. I figured out that I've been running from the wrong things. After Sarah died, I thought the ranch reminded me too much of everything I'd lost. Turned out what I couldn't face was myself. The father I hadn't been. The husband I'd failed to be when she needed me most. Ruth reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His fingers were warm from the coffee cup, calloused from work that money couldn't erase. We all carry our regrets, she said. The question is whether we let them bury us or teach us. You sound like someone who's done some learning. I've had time for it. Ruth looked around her small cabin, seeing it as Jacob must have seen it that first night. The poverty of it, the bare-bones existence, but also the care in every corner, the love that lingered in the spaces between things. When Tom died, I thought my life was over. The meaningful part, anyway. Figured I'd just maintain until my time came. Keep the fire going, eat what I could grow or preserve, wait. But that's not living, Jacob said. No, Ruth agreed. It's not. Took 3 strangers in a blizzard to remind me of that. Through the window, they watched Lily attack a snowdrift with determined sweeps of the shovel. She'd filled out in just over a week, the hollow look gone from her cheeks. Good food and genuine attention worked wonders. She told me yesterday that she likes it here, Jacob said. Said it feels like a real home, not just a place to sleep. It could be, Ruth said carefully. If you wanted it to be. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Jacob turned his coffee cup in his hands, watching the dark liquid swirl. I've got more money than I know what to do with, Ruth, more than any person needs in 3 lifetimes. I've spent the last 2 years letting it sit in accounts, letting the ranch run itself, trying to figure out what any of it meant without Sarah, what purpose it served. Money doesn't give purpose, Ruth said. It just makes the searching more comfortable. Jacob laughed, a real laugh that filled the kitchen. That's the truth of it. He set down his cup and leaned forward. I've made a decision. Actually, Lily and I made it together last night after you'd gone to bed. We talked for hours, first real conversation we've had since her mother passed. Ruth waited, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. We're not going back to the ranch. Not to live anyway. I'll sell it. Use the money to do something that matters. We talked about starting a foundation. Something for families in crisis, widows struggling alone, kids who've lost parents. Sarah would have liked that. She always said wealth was wasted on the comfortable. That sounds like fine work, Ruth said, though she felt something crumbling inside her. Of course they were leaving. Why would they stay? The thing is, Jacob continued, we need a place to start. Somewhere small and real, where we can figure out what we're doing. Somewhere that already feels like home. Ruth looked up sharply. I know this cabin is yours, Jacob said quickly. Your memories, your life with Tom. I'm not trying to take that or change it, but Lily and I were hoping we might stay. Help you fix the place up. Add on a room or 2 if you'd allow it. We could winterize properly, fix that roof, make sure you've got heat that doesn't depend on firewood scraps. Jacob, we need you, Ruth, he said simply. Not your cabin, you. Lily needs a grandmother figure who knows how to survive hard times with grace. I need a friend who'll tell me the truth even when it's uncomfortable. And maybe, if I'm reading things right, you could use a family again. Tears welled in Ruth's eyes before she could stop them. She thought of Tom, of their quiet life together, of the loneliness that had filled this cabin for 3 long years. She thought of second chances and unexpected gifts and doors opening when you least expected them. Yes, she said, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, I'd like that very much. Through the window, Lily noticed them talking and waved, her face bright with cold and happiness. Jacob waved back, then turned to Ruth with a smile that promised everything was about to change. Then we're home, he said, and for the first time in years, Ruth believed that word again.